For 50 cents he bought a ruined barn. What he discovered made every rancher shudder. In 1883, time in the small town of Red Falls flowed like muddy water at the bottom of a dried-up creek, slowly, aimlessly, and with a taste of bitter dust. The air here was so heavy it seemed to settle in one's lungs, and the only entertainments were cards, cheap whiskey, and contemplating the endless birds on the horizon. It was in this place, on the outskirts, where even the sun seemed lazy, that Silas Creek lived. He did not resemble a typical inhabitant of the Wild West. There was something about him that betrayed a man who had survived too many sunrises in solitude. His frame was thin and wiry, and his skin coarse, like the bark of an old oak. The wrinkles on his face intertwined into an intricate pattern, telling of years spent under the scorching sun and icy wind. But it was not time that left the deepest mark, but loneliness. It was engraved in his eyes, dull, the color of faded turquoise, and in the eternal stoop of his shoulders. Silas was neither a farmer nor a hunter. His calling was silence, and his home a temporary refuge. He had arrived in town about half a year ago, after his last gold vein on the Snake River ran dry, leaving him with a few dollars in his pocket and a backpack full of useless stones. He lived in a tiny room behind the saloon, where his only company was an old cat he fed with food scraps. Silas's life was gray, but he did not complain. He believed that every man had his own destiny, and his was to wander the earth, leaving only shadows behind. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was creaky and low, like the rusty hinges of an old door. He sought neither adventure nor wealth. His only desire was to find a place where he could spend his last years in peace. The townspeople disliked him, considering him an oddball. Children steered clear of him, and adults avoided direct eye contact. He was like a ghost, visible yet not existing. His only possession, besides a worn-out backpack, was an old Henry rifle, which he guarded as the apple of his eye. It was not just a weapon, but a memory of the times when he was full of hope, and of the father who had given it to him. Now, it was his only reliable friend. On this stuffy July day, Silas, sitting on the porch, tried to distract himself from the oppressive silence by cleaning his rifle. At that moment, an old rancher, Jed Stone, approached him, whom Silas knew as one of the few who did not avoid speaking with him. Jed was a stocky and broad-shouldered man with a red beard that was sprinkled with gray, like frost. His eyes, piercingly blue, regarded Silas with curiosity. "Howdy, Silas," Jed rumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Heard you're looking for a permanent place. Word is you're buying up land." Silas nodded, not lifting his head. "That's right. Wanted to for a long time. Am tired of this wandering life." Jed nodded in return, his gaze growing serious. "You know, Silas, there's a place in our town that nobody wants. It's old, abandoned, and none of the locals want to go near it. Not for no reason. It's at the edge of Red Falls, past the creek where the old oaks stand. It's a half-ruined barn that's long been a laughingstock for everyone." Silas looked at Jed with slight surprise. "What's wrong with it? Why don't people want it?" Jed scratched his beard. "Rumors. They say it's cursed, that everyone who tried to build something there found their death there. But that's all made up, of course. It just so happened." Jed smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "But if you do decide to go for it, the owner, old Mr. Dawson, will give it up for next to nothing." For 50 cents, for the first time in many months, Silas felt something akin to interest. He was tired of his life being so unremarkable, and this strange deal might be his last adventure. He looked at his palm, where two coins lay. "Reckon I've got another 50 cents. Well, thanks for the tip, Jed," Silas said. Jed waved his hand. "Don't mention it, just be careful. Some shadows are better left alone, Silas." Silas paid no mind to these words. He took his backpack and rifle and headed to the house of Mr. Dawson, who was the owner of the barn. Old Dawson, dry as a sun-cured leaf, sat on his porch, sipping whiskey. When Silas approached, the old man lifted his cloudy eyes to him. "What do you want, stranger?" he asked. "I heard you're selling the old barn." Jed Stone said you'd sell it for 50 cents. Dawson snorted. "That old coot. Yeah. I'm selling. Nobody wants to buy it. It's cursed, you see, so if you want to buy that piece of junk, I'll give it to you for those very same 50 cents. Silas handed him the coins. Dawson took them, barely looking at them. "Here. Take it." He handed Silas a crumpled slip of paper on which was written, "Sold, Mr. Dawson." Silas Creek was now the rightful owner of the old barn. He took his time, waiting until the sun dropped towards the horizon, and then headed towards his new home. The barn was truly a sorry sight. It stood on a small hill, far from other buildings, as if it had been exiled from the settlement. Leaning walls, a roof that had caved in several places, and broken windows through which the wind roamed as if a rightful owner. When Silas came closer, he smelled decay and old wood, mixed with the scent of earth. The barn looked as though life hadn't been in it for many years. The door, hanging on a single rusty hinge, let out a mournful creak when he pushed it. Inside was even worse than outside. Dust and dirt lay in a thick layer on the floor, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like a curtain. The air was filled with a suffocating smell of must. On the floor lay remnants of old hay, and in a corner were broken wooden crates. He slowly walked inside, looking around. There was nothing here but emptiness. He set down his backpack and rifle, took a kerosene lamp out of it, and lit it. The lamp's light illuminated the space, revealing all its horrors. When he looked at the walls, he noticed something strange. The wooden beams were crisscrossed with deep furrows, as if someone or something had been stripping their bark. These furrows did not look like marks from an axe or saw they were too uneven. Silas was not a superstitious man, but these furrows gave him pause. He ran his hand over one of them, feeling its rough, coarse surface. Didn't look like tracks from animal claws, too deep and too long. He decided they were just old marks from some tools and continued to examine the barn. He found an old, rusty lock hanging on one of the crates. It was locked, and Silas couldn't open it. He tried to break it, but the lock was too strong. He decided to leave it for later. He began clearing out the junk, tidying the space. With each new movement, he felt the barn come alive, as if a new breath was entering it. He worked until late into the night, and when he finished, he lay down on an old pile of hay, wrapped in a blanket. But sleep would not come to him. He looked at the ceiling, and then at the walls, and it seemed to him that the shadows on the walls were moving. He felt that he was not alone. He heard the floorboards creak and a rustling in the dark, and then it seemed to him that he heard something scraping against the wood. He quickly sat up, grabbing his rifle, and aimed it at the source of the noise. But there was no one there. He blamed it on his weariness and lay back down, closing his eyes. The next morning, when Silas woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. He stood up, stretched, and felt that the pain in his body had become customary. He examined the walls, but found no new marks. "Guess I imagined it," he mumbled, but his heart was beating with unusual strength. He spent the entire day continuing to clear out the barn. He found an old shovel and started to dig. He didn't know why he was doing it, he just wanted the place to be clean. And as he dug, he found something hard. He cleared away the dirt and saw that it was a rusty nail. He picked it up. The nail was long and thick, but most importantly, it was bent, as if someone had tried to bend it with force. Silas looked at the nail, and then at the beams. He couldn't understand why it was here, or why it was like that. He tossed the nail aside and continued to dig, but found nothing else. In the evening, when he was finished, he felt tired. He lay down on the old pile of hay and closed his eyes, but again he couldn't fall asleep. He felt that something in this barn was not right. He decided it was just his nerves and tried to fall asleep. But suddenly he heard a quiet sound. It was a creak, as if someone was opening a door. Silas opened his eyes and saw that the barn door, which he had closed for the night, was slightly ajar. He quickly got up, grabbed his rifle, and went to the door, preparing for the worst. He looked outside, but there was no one there. He closed the door, and then turned around. He didn't know why, but he felt that he was not alone. He felt that he was in some terrible place, and he needed to find a reason why. He decided that he needed some fresh air. He went outside, sat on the porch, and began to smoke his pipe. The air was cool. He looked at the stars and listened to the silence, and then he saw a silhouette approaching him. It was Jed Stone, the old rancher who had told him about the barn. Jed was wearing an old, dirty cloak. "Silas," Jed whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Silas did not answer. He just looked at Jed, and it seemed to him that Jed looked very scared. "What happened, Jed?" Silas asked. "I saw you in town. You looked so tired. Did something happen?" Jed shook his head. "No. Nothing. I just couldn't sleep. And I decided to check on you. That barn, I told you it was better not to touch it." "Why'd?" Silas asked. "What's wrong with it?" Jed looked at Silas with such horror that it made Silas uneasy. It doesn't want you here. It doesn't like strangers. Who? Silas asked. What are you talking about? Jed shook his head. Doesn't matter. Just get out of here. Don't ask any questions. You just leave. Before it's too late. Silas stood up. Jed, you're acting strange. Tell me what's going on here. Jed turned around, his eyes filled with horror. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Silas. It's not just a barn. And Jed ran off into the dark. Silas didn't know what to do. He returned to the barn, closed the door, and bolted it from the inside. He knew Jed was hiding something. He knew that this barn was not just an abandoned place. He decided that he wouldn't sleep. He would wait. He wanted to know the truth, and he felt that he was very close to it. Silas sat up all night, not closing his eyes. His mind was overwhelmed with thoughts. Why was Jed so scared? What did he want to say but couldn't? He looked at the beams, at the furrows. He couldn't understand where they came from. He ran his hand over the floor. It was covered in dust, but in some places he felt that the floor was uneven, as if there was something underneath it. Silas took the old shovel and started to dig. He dug all night, and when morning came, he was covered in dirt. He found nothing but dirt and old wood. He was disappointed. He decided he was tired and had imagined it. But when he looked at the boards he had just pulled out of the ground, he noticed something strange. They were covered with strange symbols that had been carved into the wood. They didn't look like letters, they were some kind of drawings, resembling circles, stars, and triangles. He didn't know what they were. He looked at the walls, at the beams, and he saw that these symbols were everywhere. They were carved into the walls, on the beams, on the ceiling. Silas didn't know what they were, but he felt that it was something very ancient. He decided that he needed to figure it out. The morning light, breaking through the cracks in the barn walls, no longer seemed friendly to Silas. He hadn't slept all night. His mind was like a taut string, vibrating with tension. He sat on the floor, surrounded by the boards he had pulled from the ground, and carefully examined the symbols carved on them. They were not just scribbles. Each mark had clear, precise lines, as if applied by a master's hand. Among the circles, triangles, and broken lines, he noticed a repeating pattern. A 7-pointed star inscribed in a circle, and next to it, 3 parallel lines, crossed by one vertical one. Silas was not a scholar, but he knew these were no ordinary marks. They were too precise, too purposeful. He ran his hand over one of them, and a chill ran through his skin. These marks were not just carved, they were burned into the wood, as if from intense heat or, even stranger, from incredible pressure. He gathered the boards, wrapped them in an old rag, and hid them in his backpack. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't understand what these marks meant, but his instincts, honed by years of wandering, screamed danger. He felt that this mystery not only belonged to this barn but might also be connected to what Jed Stone had been so desperately trying to tell him. Silas left the barn. The morning was cool and clear, but he felt no freshness. He needed to find someone who could explain what these symbols were. His first thought was to go to the saloon, but he quickly dismissed the idea. The locals would just laugh at him or take him for a madman. He needed a man who had lived on this land longer than anyone else, who knew its history, and he knew who that might be. On the outskirts of Red Falls, across the river, lived an old Indian whom everyone called Old Man Bear. He was one of the last of his tribe in these parts, and it was rumored that he was not only wise, but also possessed ancient knowledge. He lived in a small hut, surrounded by a garden of medicinal herbs that he grew himself. The townspeople were wary of him, but respected him. When Silas approached the hut, he saw Old Man Bear sitting by a fire. He was thin, with a face cut by wrinkles like a mountain ridge. His eyes, deep and dark, looked right into one's soul, and his long gray hair was braided into plaits. Silas came closer, and the Old Man Bear lifted his gaze to him. He did not say a word, just looked at him. Silas felt awkward. He slowly took a board with the carved symbols out of his backpack. "I found this," Silas said quietly, holding out the board. "I don't know what it is. Can you help me?" Old Man Bear took the board, his fingers cautiously tracing the carved marks. His face remained impassive, but something appeared in his eyes that made Silas tense up. The bear closed his eyes, as if listening to something. Then he slowly opened them. "These marks," he whispered, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "They are not just marks. They are words." A long, oppressive silence fell. Silas held his breath. "What do they mean?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Old Man Bear looked at him. "They tell a story of a death that did not want to die. Once, a very long time ago, an evil lived on this land. It was invisible, bodiless, but it fed on fear and hatred. It brought death, and it knew no peace. It killed people, animals, and even trees. Then, our ancestors, great shamans, decided to stop it. They found a place where the evil was strongest, and they built a prison for it. That prison is what you call a barn. Old Man Bear pointed with his hand toward the barn. They built it from a special wood that grew only in these parts. They carved these symbols on every lock, on every board. These are not just symbols, they are spells that held the evil inside. They were protective marks. But one day the barn passed into strange hands and people didn't understand what was happening with it. They thought it was just an old building. Then, over time, the symbols began to disappear and the evil inside awoke, but it could not get out until the symbols were completely destroyed. The protection was not destroyed. It was just weakened, and then a terrible thing happened. The evil inside the barn fell asleep again and waited for its hour. Silas felt the blood freeze in his veins. He remembered Jedstone's words, the curse that was rumored to hang over this place. What about the nails? I found a nail that was bent. Silas took the nail out of his backpack. Old Man Bear took it in his hand, his face growing somber. This is not just a nail. This was the final lock. The nails our ancestors used were special. They were forged from metal taken from a skystone that fell to the earth. They were the only thing that could hold this evil. And this nail, it was bent. That means something inside was trying to get out. And it did. What do you mean? Silas asked, his voice trembling. Old Man Bear looked him straight in the eyes. You have broken the last barrier. You dug up these boards from the ground. You, without knowing it, have weakened the last spells that held the evil inside. And now it is free. It has awoken. It felt your strength, your life energy. You have become its target. Silas jumped to his feet, his heart pounding like crazy. He couldn't believe his ears. This was not like his usual reality. This was a horror he could not imagine. What should I do? Keith whispered. Old Man Bear shook his head. You cannot run. You cannot hide. The evil will follow you. It will feed on your fear. The only way to save yourself is to return it to where it came from. How? Silas asked. How do I do that? Old Man Bear pointed at Silas' backpack. These symbols, you need to find all of them. Everything that remains. And you need to find the key. A key that can open the door to this world and close it forever. Silas felt the ground give way beneath his feet. He was just an old, lonely man who wanted to find peace. And now he had become a pawn in an ancient game he didn't even know about. And what will happen to me? Silas asked. Will I die? Old Man Bear did not answer. He just looked at him. Silas turned around and ran. He ran as fast as he could. He didn't know where he was running. He just wanted to get away. He ran towards the barn to get all his things and escape from this town. He felt that the evil was pursuing him. He felt that it was already near. When Silas reached the barn, the sun was already high in the sky. He quickly went inside, grabbed his backpack and rifle, and was about to run out, but then he stopped. The barn door, which he had bolted, was open. There were marks on the floor, but they weren't boot prints. They were marks that looked like claw prints. They led to the ladder that went up to the loft. Silas looked at the ladder, and then at his backpack. He knew he had to leave, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He slowly, cautiously climbed up to the loft. It was dark and dusty up there. He raised his rifle, preparing for the worst, and then he heard a voice. It was quiet, whispering, and it seemed to come from everywhere. You came, you woke me up. Silas slowly turned, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was no one there. He felt something touch his shoulder, and he screamed. In that moment, he lost consciousness, falling to the floor. He fell right onto a board, the board with the carved symbols. When he came to, he didn't know how much time had passed. He was lying on the floor, and in his hand was clenched a small, time-darkened wooden amulet, resembling those very carved symbols. He didn't know where it came from, and then he heard a loud, piercing scream. It wasn't him screaming. The animals were screaming. All the ranches in the area. And that scream was filled with horror. Silas jumped to his feet, looked out the window, and saw something that made his heart clench with horror. The herd of cows that had been grazing in the field were dead. Their bodies were scattered across the field, and on the neck of each one were deep, long marks, like the furrows on the beams. He knew what it was. The evil that Old Man Bear had spoken of had broken free, and it had already managed to do its first terrible thing. Everything Silas Creek saw out the barn window made his heart freeze. He couldn't believe his eyes. On the ranch that belonged to Jedstone, dead animals lay. He immediately understood that this was the work of what he had unwittingly set free. This horror was palpable, you could almost touch it. Silas ran out of the barn, his body tense. He ran toward Yet's ranch, paying no attention to the stones under his feet. When he reached the ranch, he saw Jed Stone. He was kneeling, his hands wrapped around his head. He wasn't crying, he was just sitting there. His face was pale, and his eyes were full of horror. Silas walked up to him. "Jed," he whispered. Jed lifted his head. His eyes were empty. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you, Silas. This isn't just a rumor. It's the truth. I knew this would happen. I just didn't think it would be so soon." Silas felt a surge of anger rise in him. He was angry not at Jed, but at himself. He was angry at his own naivety, at his greed. He was angry that he, without knowing it, had set this evil free. He wasn't ready for this. He wanted to leave, but something held him there. He couldn't leave Jed. He couldn't leave this town, which he had doomed to death. He felt that he had to do something. He had to stop it. "Jed, we have to do something," Silas said. "We can't just sit and wait for it to kill everyone." Jed looked at him. "You don't understand, Silas. This isn't an animal. This isn't a person. It's a shadow. You can't fight it. You can't kill it." Silas shook his head. "I can't just sit and watch it kill people." He stood up and went back to the barn. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back to the place where he had found the key to the puzzle. He returned to the town, which was gripped by panic. The townspeople were in a state of terror. They had gathered in the main square. They were screaming, crying, praying. They were scared. And they were angry. Angry at fate, at God, at everything. When they saw Silas, their anger turned on him. "It's him!" Someone shouted. "He brought this curse to our town." The crowd, as one, moved towards him. Their faces were contorted with rage. They were ready to tear him to pieces. Silas stood his ground, not moving. He knew they couldn't hear him. He knew they didn't want to listen. He raised his hands, trying to calm them. "Listen to me. I can explain everything," he shouted. But his words were drowned out by the shouts of the crowd. "Kill him," someone yelled. "He's one of them." Silas understood that he couldn't explain anything to them. They were too scared to listen. He decided he had to leave. He began to back away slowly, but then someone grabbed him. It was the old butcher, John. He was a large, strong man, and he was angry. "You think you can just come to our town and kill our animals? You think you can just leave?" he shouted, his eyes bloodshot. Silas felt his heart clench. He knew John wasn't kidding. He knew John was ready to kill him. He felt someone hit him on the head. He fell, and the crowd swarmed him. They hit him, kicked him, spit on him. He didn't resist. He knew it was useless. And then he heard a voice. "Stop it!" Jed Stone yelled. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, holding a shotgun. "He's not to blame. He didn't know what he was doing. We're the ones to blame. We knew this place was cursed, but we did nothing. We just sat and waited." Jed didn't wait for the crowd's reaction. He ran to Silas, helped him up, and then gave him the shotgun. "Run," he whispered. "Run, Silas. Run and don't come back. Not for yourself, for all of us. Find a way to stop it." Silas looked at Jed, and then at the crowd. He saw how their faces had changed. Their anger had turned to fear. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't understand what was happening. Silas turned and ran. He ran as fast as he could. He didn't know where he was running. He just wanted to get away. He felt his heart pounding, his blood throbbing in his temples. He felt that the evil was pursuing him. He felt that it was already near. He ran towards the barn. He had to go back there. Only there could he find answers. When Silas reached the barn, he was covered in dirt and blood. He bolted the door and fell to the floor, gasping for breath. He was angry. Angry at himself. Angry that he had gotten himself into this. Angry that he hadn't listened to Jed. But most of all, he was angry at this evil. He decided that he wouldn't run. He would fight. He stood up, took the shotgun Jed had given him, and began to examine the barn. He felt that he was not alone. He felt that the evil was watching him. He saw the shadows on the walls move. He heard a quiet whisper that came from everywhere. He knew it wasn't his imagination. It was real. He wasn't crazy. He was trapped. He took the lantern that was on the floor and began to examine the walls. He saw that the symbols he had seen yesterday had become brighter. They were glowing with a faint, greenish light. He felt his heart clench. He understood that the evil he had unleashed was growing stronger. It was feeding on the fear and panic that reigned in the town. And he understood that he had to do something. He had to find a way to stop it. He remembered Old Man Bear's words. You need to find the key. A key that can open the door to this world and close it forever. He looked at the amulet he had found, and he understood that this was that very key. He took it in his hand and felt it pulsating. He knew that this amulet was connected to this place. He decided that he wouldn't just sit and wait. He would look for answers. He would fight. He began to examine the walls, and he noticed something strange. In one of the walls, somewhere in the center, there was a small protrusion. Silas came closer and saw that it was an old wooden board that was nailed to the wall. He tried to tear it off, but it was too strong. He took a crowbar he found in the barn and began to pry it off. He worked for a long time. His body was tense. He felt that the evil was watching him. He heard a quiet whisper, "Leave me alone. I don't want you to find me." Silas ignored these words. He continued to work, and finally, he was able to tear off the board. Behind it was emptiness. He looked inside, and he saw nothing. He was disappointed. He thought he would find something there, but there was nothing there. He was about to leave, but then he felt something touch his shoulder. He turned around, and he saw a shadow, resembling a person, standing right in front of him. It had no face, it had no eyes, but he felt that it was looking at him. He felt a shiver run down his spine. He raised his rifle, took aim, but then he felt something grab his arm. He looked at his hand and saw shadows, like claws, digging into his arm. He screamed. His rifle fell to the floor. He fell, and the shadow pounced on him. He felt it trying to choke him. He struggled, but he felt that he was losing. He was weaker. Silas Creek fell to the floor as the invisible shadow pounced on him. He felt invisible claws digging into his throat, squeezing it, taking away his air. He struggled, tried to push away what he could not see, but it was useless. His lungs burned from the lack of air, and his vision went dark. He heard a quiet, piercing whisper that sounded in his head. It was a voice full of hatred and ancient fury. "You came, you woke me up, the voice whispered. Silas felt his life force leaving him. He was weaker. He was at the brink. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end. And then he felt something burning his hand. It was the amulet he had found. It glowed with a faint, greenish light. He felt the power he could not understand pass through his body. He felt something inside him fighting this evil. It was a force full of light and hope. The shadow retreated. It stood in a corner, as if something invisible was preventing it from getting closer. He felt something pressing on him, but it was no longer evil. It was a force that came from the amulet. He was safe. But he was not alone. He heard a voice, the voice of the shadow. It was no longer a whisper. It was a loud, piercing scream. "You fool! You think you can stop me? I have waited for thousands of years to get out. You think some piece of wood can stop me?" The voice screamed, and its words echoed in the barn walls. Silas felt his heart pounding. He was scared, but he was angry. He stood up, took the shotgun, and aimed it at the shadow. "I don't know what you are," he whispered, "but I know you shouldn't be free. I know you should be here. And I know that I have to do something about it." The shadow fell silent. It stood in the corner, not moving. It just looked at him. Silas felt its eyes, which were not there, burning through him. He lowered the shotgun. He knew he couldn't kill something that had no body. He knew he needed something else. He looked at the wall from where he had torn off the board. He looked into the empty space he had found. He felt the amulet in his hand pulsating. He was sure that he had to find something there. He reached his hand into the empty space. He didn't know what he was doing. He was just following his instincts. His hand touched something. It was something hard, cold, and smooth. He pulled it out. It was a small, wooden box. It was old, weathered by time, but it was perfectly smooth. It had no lock, no key, but it was closed. He tried to open it, but it wouldn't give way. He looked at the amulet in his hand, and he understood. He placed the amulet against the box. He felt the amulet and the box become one. It opened. Silas opened the box and saw an old, time-yellowed scroll inside. It was rolled up and tied with a string. He unrolled it. It was an ancient, yellowed parchment. On it were drawn strange symbols, similar to those he had found on the boards. But they were not just symbols. They were maps. Maps on which were drawn mountains, rivers, and something he couldn't understand. He unrolled the parchment all the way, and he saw a symbol in the center of the map. It was the seven-pointed star, inscribed in a circle. In the center of the star was carved some text. Silas began to read it. The text was in an ancient language, but he seemed to understand it. It was a text that told a story about two brothers. One was named Cain, the other Abel. They were great warriors, they fought for their people. But one of them, Cain, was greedy. He wanted power. He wanted a force he couldn't have. He sold his soul to this evil. He gave it a body, and he gave it a power that no one could have. Abel, his brother, was righteous. He fought him. He defeated him. But he could not kill him. He could only imprison him. He built this barn, and he carved these symbols. He locked his brother in a prison, but he knew that he couldn't hold him forever. He knew that one day he would be free, and he left this scroll as a key, as a last chance. Silas couldn't believe his eyes. It was too unbelievable. It was too strange. He was just an old, lonely man. He was just a prospector, and now he was drawn into an ancient war between two brothers. He looked at the shadow that stood in the corner. He saw it move. It was scared. It was angry. It wanted to kill him. He understood that the scroll was the key. It was the key that could return Cain back to the prison. But he also understood that it was not simple. He had to find the place that was drawn on the mat. He had to find what was hidden there. He had to find the weapon that could kill Cain. He looked at the shadow again. He saw it getting bigger. It was ready to attack. It was ready to kill him. Silas felt his heart clench. He knew he had to act fast. He had to leave. He had to find this place. He had to find this weapon. He knew he couldn't stay here. He took the scroll, rolled it up, and hid it in his bag. He took the shotgun. He was ready. He was ready to fight. He was ready to die, if necessary. He left the barn. He felt that the evil was following him. He felt that it was watching him. He felt that it wanted to kill him. He knew that this was not just a shadow. This was Cain. When Silas left the barn, he saw Jed Stone. He was standing at the gate, his face pale. What did you do, Silas?" Keith whispered. Silas looked at him. He couldn't explain anything to him. He couldn't tell him that he hadn't just set a shadow free. He had set Cain free. He couldn't tell him that he was now the only one who could stop him. He just shook his head. "I don't know," he whispered. He looked at the sky. The sun was already setting. Night was coming. He knew the night would be long. He knew that Cain would hunt him. He knew that he had to be ready. He turned and looked at the barn. He saw shadows, like claws, coming out of it. He felt his heart clench. He knew he couldn't go back. He had to go forward. He had to find this place. He had to find this weapon. He had to save this town. Silas Creek fell to the floor as the invisible shadow pounced on him. He felt invisible claws digging into his throat, squeezing it, taking away his air. He struggled, tried to push away what he could not see, but it was useless. His lungs burned from the lack of air, and his vision went dark. He heard a quiet, piercing whisper that sounded in his head. It was a voice full of hatred and ancient fury. "You came, you woke me up, the voice whispered. Silas felt his life force leaving him. He was weaker. He was at the brink. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end. And then he felt something burning his hand. It was the amulet he had found. It glowed with a faint, greenish light. He felt the power he could not understand pass through his body. He felt something inside him fighting this evil. It was a force full of light and hope. The shadow retreated. It stood in a corner, as if something invisible was preventing it from getting closer. He felt something pressing on him, but it was no longer evil. It was a force that came from the amulet. He was safe. But he was not alone. He heard a voice, the voice of the shadow. It was no longer a whisper. It was a loud, piercing scream. "You fool. You think you can stop me? I have waited for thousands of years to get out. You think some piece of wood can stop me?" The voice screamed, and its words echoed in the barn walls. Silas felt his heart pounding. He was scared, but he was angry. He stood up, took the shotgun, and aimed it at the shadow. "I don't know what you are," he whispered, "but I know you shouldn't be free. I know you should be here. And I know that I have to do something about it." The shadow fell silent. It stood in the corner, not moving. It just looked at him. Silas felt its eyes, which were not there, burning through him. He lowered the shotgun. He knew he couldn't kill something that had no body. He knew he needed something else. He looked at the wall from where he had torn off the board. He looked into the empty space he had found. He felt the amulet in his hand pulsating. He was sure that he had to find something there. He reached his hand into the empty space. He touched something. It was something hard, cold, and smooth. He pulled it out. It was a small, wooden box. It was old, weathered by time, but it was perfectly smooth. It had no lock, no key, but it was closed. He tried to open it, but it wouldn't give way. He looked at the amulet in his hand. and he understood. He placed the amulet against the box. He felt the amulet and the box become one. It opened. Silas opened the box and saw an old, time-yellowed scroll inside. It was rolled up and tied with a string. He unrolled it. It was an ancient, yellowed parchment. On it were drawn strange symbols, similar to those he had found on the boards. But they were not just symbols. They were maps. Maps on which were drawn mountains, rivers, and something he couldn't understand. He unrolled the parchment all the way, and he saw a symbol in the center of the map. It was the seven-pointed star, inscribed in a circle. In the center of the star was carved some text. Silas began to read it. The text was in an ancient language, but he seemed to understand it. It was a text that told a story about two brothers. One was named Cain, the other Abel. They were great warriors. They fought for their people. But one of them, Cain, was greedy. He wanted power. He wanted a force he couldn't have. He sold his soul to this evil. He gave it a body, and he gave it a power that no one could have. Abel, his brother, was righteous. He fought him. He defeated him. But he could not kill him. He could only imprison him. He built this barn, and he carved these symbols. He locked his brother in a prison, but he knew that he couldn't hold him forever. He knew that one day he would be free, and he left this scroll as a key, as a last chance. Silas couldn't believe his eyes. It was too unbelievable. It was too strange. He was just an old, lonely man. He was just a prospector, and now he was drawn into an ancient war between two brothers. He looked at the shadow that stood in the corner. He saw it move. It was scared. It was angry. It wanted to kill him. He understood that the scroll was the key. It was the key that could return Cain back to the prison. But he also understood that it was not simple. He had to find the place that was drawn on the mat. He had to find what was hidden there. He had to find the weapon that could kill Cain. He looked at the shadow again. He saw it getting bigger. It was ready to attack. It was ready to kill him. Silas felt his heart clench. He knew he had to act fast. He had to leave. He had to find this place. He had to find this weapon. He knew he couldn't stay here. He took the scroll, rolled it up, and hid it in his bag. He took the shotgun. He was ready. He was ready to fight. He was ready to die, if necessary. He left the barn. He felt that the evil was following him. He felt that it was watching him. He felt that it wanted to kill him. He knew that this was not just a shadow. This was Cain. When Silas left the barn, he saw Jed Stone. He was standing at the gate, his face pale. What did you do, Silas?" Keith whispered. Silas looked at him. He couldn't explain anything to him. He couldn't tell him that he hadn't just set a shadow free. He had set Cain free. He couldn't tell him that he was now the only one who could stop him. He just shook his head. "I don't know," he whispered. He looked at the sky. The sun was already setting. Night was coming. He knew the night would be long. He knew that Cain would hunt him. He knew that he had to be ready. He turned and looked at the barn. He saw shadows, like claws, coming out of it. He felt his heart clench. He knew he couldn't go back. He had to go forward. He had to find this place. He had to find this weapon. He had to save this town. Silas Creek, holding the glowing crystal in his hand, did not look back. He felt the power he could not understand pass through his body. He was exhausted, but he felt that he could do anything. He knew he had to return. He had to return to the barn, to the place where it all began. It was the only place where he could finish what he had started. He began his journey back. But this was not the same path he had taken while fleeing from the shadow. This was a path filled with determination. He walked slowly but surely. He felt that Cain, although weakened, was still near. He felt its presence, its hatred, but he was not scared. He was angry. He was angry that this evil had tormented people for so long. He was angry that he had been drawn into this. But he was ready. He was ready for the final battle. When Silas reached the town, the sun was already high in the sky. The town was quiet. The streets were empty. He saw people looking out of windows as if they were afraid to go outside. He saw how their faces were full of fear. He knew they were scared. They were afraid of what they could not understand. They were afraid of what he, Silas, had brought to their town. He did not judge them. He understood them. He walked down the street without stopping. He did not look at them. He just walked. He walked toward the barn. And then he heard a voice. "Silas!" Jed Stone shouted. He ran out of his house. His face was pale, but there was a spark of hope in his eyes. What happened?" Keith whispered. Silas stopped. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't explain anything to him. He just raised his hand, pointing at the crystal. "I have to finish this," he whispered. Jed looked at him. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded. He knew Silas was right. He knew Silas was the only one who could do this. Silas went into the barn. It was the same as he had left it. Only on the floor were the marks from his fall. He felt the air in the barn become cold. He felt the evil returning. He heard a quiet, ominous whisper. "You came, I have been waiting for you," the voice whispered. Silas placed the crystal on the floor. It was heavy. It was cold. It was the same as it had been when he found it. He took out the scroll. He unrolled it. He was ready. He began to read. He didn't know what he was reading. He just read. He read the symbols that were on the scroll. He felt his voice grow stronger. He felt his body fill with power. He felt his heart fill with determination. He read, and he felt the evil returning. It was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the floor, in the air. It was all around him. It was ready for the final battle. Silas continued to read. He felt the barn begin to shake. He heard the walls creaking. He heard the nails flying out of the wood. He saw objects that were on the floor begin to fly. He knew that this was Cain. This was his last attempt. He was angry. He was furious. He was ready to destroy everything. But Silas did not stop. He continued to read. He felt the crystal, which was on the floor, begin to glow. It glowed with a bright, white light. The light that came from the crystal was like a wall. It did not let the evil come closer. He continued to read. He felt his voice grow louder. He felt his body fill with power. He felt his heart fill with hope. He read, and he felt the evil begin to retreat. It could not stand the light. It could not stand his determination. It could not stand his voice. Silas read, and he felt the crystal begin to rise in the air. It rose above the floor, and it glowed brighter than ever. Silas knew what this was. This was the very place where he had to finish it. He looked at the crystal. He watched it slowly lower to the very spot where he had found the bent nail. He knew what it was. This was the final lock. He knew he had to close it. He closed his eyes and concentrated on what he was doing. He felt his hand, which held the scroll, begin to tremble. He felt his body fill with power. He felt his heart fill with determination. He read, and he felt the crystal slowly but surely lower into place. He felt it enter the floor. He felt it connect with the bent nail. He felt it enter the ground. In that moment, Silas felt something shift. He felt something inside the barn begin to compress. He heard a piercing scream. It was a scream full of pain and fury. It was Cain's scream. He could not get out. He was trapped. Silas opened his eyes and saw. He saw the symbols that were on the boards begin to glow. They glowed with a bright, golden light. They glowed as if they were alive. Silas looked at them. He watched them rise, as they connected, as they became one. He watched the barn, which had been so old, so dirty, so ruined, begin to change. It became brighter, it became cleaner. It became new. It looked like the old one, but it was new. It was new, as if it had been built just now. It was new, as if it had been built to be a prison. And then everything vanished. Silas no longer felt the evil. He no longer heard the voice. He no longer felt something watching him. He was alone, in the barn. He was exhausted. His body ached, but he felt his heart fill with joy. He had done it. He had done what no one else could. He had saved this town. He had saved these people. He had saved himself. He sat on the floor, and he looked at the barn. It looked like the old one, but it was new. It was new, as if it had been built to be a prison. It was new, as if it had been built to be a home. When Silas Creek woke up, he felt the sun gently warming his face. He was lying on the floor, but it was no longer the dirty, dusty floor it had been yesterday. It was clean, smooth, as if it had just been cut. He got up, his body was exhausted, but his heart was light. He looked around. The barn was as he had seen it in his visions. It looked like the old one, but it was new. The walls were clean, without dust or dirt. The floors were smooth, and the roof was whole. It seemed as if this barn had never been ruined. He walked to the door and opened it. The air that entered the barn was clean, fresh, without any hint of evil. Silas felt his heart fill with joy. He had done it. He had done what no one else could. He had saved this town. He left the barn. The morning was beautiful. Birds were singing. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh grass. He felt his body fill with strength. He was ready for a new day. He walked toward the town. He didn't know what awaited him there. He didn't know what the people would say to him. He was ready for anything. When he reached the town, he saw that it was not the same one he had left yesterday. People had come out into the streets. They were not screaming, not crying. They were just walking. They were talking. They were laughing. They were calm. They were at peace. They didn't know what he had done. They didn't know he had saved them. They just knew that the evil was gone. He walked down the street, and he saw that people were looking at him. They were not looking at him with the hatred they had yesterday. They were looking at him with surprise. They didn't know what he had done, but they knew he was the only one who had been in the barn. They knew he was the only one who could have done it. Silas continued to walk. He did not look at them. He just walked. He walked, and he felt his heart fill with pride. He had done it. He had done it not for himself. He had done it for them. When he reached the saloon, he saw Jed Stone standing at the entrance. He looked tired, but there was a sparkle in his eyes. He saw Silas, and he smiled. "Silas," he whispered. He walked up to Silas and hugged him. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew you could do it." Silas didn't know what to say. He just stood there. He felt his heart fill with warmth. Jed led him into the saloon. The saloon was full of people. They were there. They were calm. They were at peace. They didn't know what he had done, but they knew he had saved them. Jed walked up to him. He took his hand. "Silas," he whispered, we want to thank you. We want to give you something." Silas shook his head. "I don't need anything," he whispered. Jed looked at him. "We want you to stay. We want you to be with us." Silas looked at the people. He saw their faces were full of hope. He saw that they wanted him to stay. He knew that he could stay. He could live in this town, be a part of this town. He could live in peace. But he couldn't. He couldn't leave this barn. He couldn't leave this place. He knew that he had to return. He had to be here. He had to be the guardian. He had to be the one who would guard this place. He had to be the one who would protect this town. Silas returned to the barn. He was alone. He was ready. He was ready for a new life. He knew that he wouldn't be lonely. He would be with the barn. He would be with this place. He would be with this town. He would be with these people. He would be their guardian. He would be their protector. He would be the one who would protect them from evil. He knew that he couldn't tell them the whole truth. He couldn't tell them that he hadn't just set them free. He had locked up evil. He couldn't tell them that he wasn't just a man. He had become a guardian. He had become the one who would guard this place. He had become the one who would protect this town. He sat on the barn's doorstep. He felt the sun warming his face. He felt the wind caressing his hair. He felt his heart fill with peace. He was lonely, but he was not alone. He was with this place. He was with this town. He was with these people. He was their guardian. He was their protector. He was the one who would protect them from evil. He knew that his life had changed. He was no longer just an old, lonely man. He was a guardian. He was a protector. He was the one who had found his place in this world. He was the one who had found his peace. He was the one who had found his home. It had been 5 years since the horror left the Valley of Red Falls. The town had been transformed. The ranchers whose herds had been destroyed were able to rebuild them, and even more. The land, which had once seemed barren, now yielded an abundant harvest. The river that flowed through the town became full, and the fish in it, large and plump. The town grew. New houses, new shops, even a school appeared. People lived in peace and prosperity. They were happy. And they never forgot. They never forgot that it all began with one man and one abandoned bar. Silas Creek was no longer an old, lonely man. He was a part of this town. He was its invisible protector. He lived in a small house that he had built himself, next to the barn. He no longer sought gold. He had found something more precious than gold. He had found his purpose. The barn he had bought for 50 cents became his home, his sanctuary, his prison. He sat on the doorstep of his house every day, looking at the barn. It looked like the old one, but it was new. It was new, as if it had been built just now. It was new, as if it had been built to be a prison. It was new, as if it had been built to be a home. One day, as the sun was setting, a boy came up to Silas. He looked like Jed Stone's son. He was curious, as all children are. He sat down next to Silas. "They say you saved our town," he whispered. Silas looked at him. He didn't answer. He just looked at the setting sun. "They say you bought this barn for 50 cents, the book continued. "And they say you found something in it that made every rancher shudder." Silas smiled. "I did," he whispered. "I found something more precious than gold. I found my purpose." The boy looked at him. He didn't understand. "What purpose?" he asked. Silas looked at the barn. "Do you see this barn?" he asked. The boy nodded. "It was cursed," Silas said. "It was a prison in which evil was locked away." "And you?" the boy asked. "You saved us." Silas shook his head. "I didn't save you," he whispered. "I just did what I had to do. I returned the evil to where it came from." The boy looked at him. He still didn't understand. "But how?" he asked. "What did you find?" Silas looked at him, and he understood that it was time to tell him the truth. Not the truth he knew, but the truth he had come to understand. "I found," he whispered, "that true value is not in what you can buy with money. I bought this barn for 50 cents because it seemed worthless to me, but it turned out to be the most valuable thing I had ever found. It gave me a purpose." Silas looked at the barn. "I thought I wanted to find gold," he whispered. "I spent my whole life looking for gold. I was lonely, I was miserable. I thought that gold would make me happy, but I was wrong. I found happiness when I found my purpose. I found my purpose when I understood that I could help others. I found my purpose when I understood that I could be a guardian. I found my purpose when I understood that I could protect this town." The boy looked at Silas. He looked at him like a hero. He looked at him like the one who had saved them. He was just an old, lonely man who had bought a barn for 50 cents. But he turned out to be a hero. He turned out to be the one who had saved them. He turned out to be the one who had found his purpose. He turned out to be the one who had found his peace. He turned out to be the one who had found his home. And Silas knew that this was the truth. He knew that he hadn't just saved this town. He had saved himself. He had saved himself from loneliness, from despair, from emptiness. He had found his purpose in this world. He had found his peace. He had found his home. And he knew that he would be here forever. He would be the guardian. He would be the protector. He would be the one who would guard this town. He would be the one who would guard this barn. He would be the one who would guard this world. And he knew that this was what he was meant to do. He knew that this was what he was living for. Moral of the story: the true value of life is not in what we can accumulate or buy, but in what we find when we stop searching. Silas thought he was buying a worthless building for a symbolic price, but in reality, he was buying his destiny and purpose. He found true wealth not in gold, but in serving and protecting others, proving that the greatest calling is often hidden in the most unexpected and seemingly insignificant places. What made the ranchers shudder in fear, in the end, became the source of prosperity, because true peace and strength come not with gold, but with a clean conscience and a noble deed.